Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. Whether we're from Berkeley or Baldwin, Webster Groves or Winchester, we all call ourselves St. Louisans. There are more than 90 municipalities in the county, dozens of police and fire departments, some 24 school districts. The regional political fragmentation and division is often cited as an obstacle to efficient planning and growth in the area. Some feel consolidation of these political jurisdictions, including the city itself, would make the region a much more efficient area and result in less expensive delivery of services. However, there are those who argue that multiple local jurisdictions keep government much closer and responsive to the people. From time to time, St. Louis Public Radio will be looking at issues that may bind or divide our community. We call this ongoing series Bound by Division. I'm Don Marsh. Today, the case for and against city-county consolidation. With me in studio is Terry Jones, political scientist and public policy instructor here at the University of Missouri St. Louis. He is also author of Fragmented by Design, Why St. Louis Has So Many Governments. Richard Ward is vice president of Zimmer Real Estate Services and has extensive experience in the public and private project development arena. Joining us later by phone will be William Hudnut III, four-term former mayor of Indianapolis, and Professor Hank Savage, professor of urban and public affairs at the University of Louisville. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us in studio. Terry and Richard, good to see you.
Good to see you, Don. My pleasure.
Terry, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to be unfair because the question I have for you would take an hour all by itself. So I'll ask you, if you can, to give me a thumbnail of how we got where we are with these 90-plus municipalities in this area.
In the 1870s, the city of St. Louis, which then extended to Grand Avenue and was part of the St. Louis County, said we don't want to pay for improvements in the rural areas. So it devised a scheme using the Missouri Constitutional Convention of 1875 to separate itself successfully from St. Louis County. It had remorse about that in the 1920s and continued to have it even extending in other parts of the 20th century, but efforts to get the two back together again have never succeeded. Then as suburbanization occurred in the 20th century, people moving out from the city to the county, they decided by and large to, instead of having a few large municipalities, which is essentially what St. Charles County has gone with, to instead have many smaller ones. And so by the 1950s, we had almost 100, and we've stayed about that number, a little less, since then.
And Richard Ward, give me your take on that and what it has meant to this area from your perspective as one who has worked so long in the public-private arena.
Well, my biggest concern is I think this tends to drive our thinking to the lowest common denominator. People do have respect for and loyalty to where they live and where they pay taxes, where they have elections, the community that they're part of. So, and they tend to have much less loyalty or concern or they're not stakeholders in adjacent communities. So their focus goes to that place where they live, and I think that causes when you fragment it so much, which we are kind of the archetype of. It means that so many people are thinking at such a small scale. They're thinking of neighborhoods, what would be otherwise neighborhoods in larger cities. These are separate municipalities. I think it causes small thinking, parochialism in the extreme in St. Louis.
Terry, do you agree with that?
It's a challenge, but I think we have to be very careful that we do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. When you ask St. Louisans what they like most about the community, the answer you hear more often than not is it has a small-town feel but cosmopolitan amenities. And the secret to having a small-town feel is to have a lot of small towns. So as we try to develop greater ability to act as a region, and we certainly need to do that, we should not throw the small towns out in the process.
But it has been an impediment to growth and planning?
It has been at times. It also is one of the things that makes this area particularly attractive.
Go ahead. Richard,
well, particularly attractive. I think you got to be careful. We have been a very slow growth region. We were in the decade of the 70s. We were, I think, the only large metropolitan area that lost population. We've lost 190,000 people to outmigration in the 1970s, 90,000 to outmigration in the 80s, and about 45,000 in the 90s. This is net people leaving, more people leaving than coming into our region. So, yeah, attractive, okay, but I think maybe attractive to people who maybe don't sometimes know any different. They've had very narrow perspectives of where they live and don't see a lot of newcomers coming in, and the newcomers aren't challenging them to think in a bigger way. So, yeah, people may be, quote, satisfied if you ask them, because they may not really understand the options.
So is consolidation of some sort, Terry, the magic bullet to make everything better?
No, no, and no. What we do need to do is be simultaneously local and regional, not one or the other. We need not to pit them against one another. And we're very good at being local. We need to be better at being regional. But we need to do that simultaneously.
Consolidation, Richard?
Well, I think consolidation is a step we should try to take and prepare ourselves and try to do it carefully. When you say consolidation, what I mean by that is for the city to re-enter the county. I think it's a scary word, that and the word merger, because people think everything gets mushed into one big thing. I think we'd be better off if the city were part of the county instead of being its own county. That's essentially what we have right now. That doesn't mean the city goes away. It doesn't mean that the city takes over the municipalities in St. Louis County. It doesn't mean that they have to go away necessarily either. I mean, that's not the suggestion when you talk about that. But I think we would have a more, let's call it, comprehensive central government to begin to exercise greater regional leadership over regional matters if we had the city as part of the county.
How would we have more central government? Wouldn't we just be adding, quote, a municipality to the number already there?
Well, you have a county government now that does have a lot of stature and standing, over 1 million people. And I think if the city were there, the city would have a major role in the county, obviously, as being 300,000, 350,000 people. So it would clearly be the predominant governmental entity in the metropolitan area. Right now, there's no one to lead this region. I mean, there's no place to look to for leadership. As much as one might like the mayor, the current mayor, or whatever the mayor of the city of St. Louis, he's still the mayor of only 350,000 people. And the county executive is running a county of 1 million people, but it certainly is fragmented internally, and if you had a big city in St. Louis County, you would have, I think, a much stronger leadership entity for the metropolitan area. And it's no nirvana. I'm not suggesting that.
This is something that Mayor Slay has been talking about recently, Terry. How do you see that? City entering the county, would that change things dramatically?
Well, first of all, I think it's too drastic a step and would not be accepted by a majority of the electorate in either the city or the county, which is both essential for it to happen, necessary constitutionally for it to happen. Instead, I think we should continue to do at an accelerated pace what we've been doing the last 30 to 40 years, and that is doing more things together. We have a joint zoo museum district. We have a joint metropolitan sewer district, things like that. We can explore other areas such as public health, corrections, and see whether or not it makes sense to do those things together rather than separately.